What would you do if your husband of 15 years walked through your front door with a stranger's child by his side and calmly asked you to leave your own house? Would you scream, break down, or would you do what Julia Bennett did? Stay silent and start writing everything down. Julia was the kind of woman people overlooked: a devoted wife, a full-time mother, and the quiet caretaker of a home that no longer felt like hers. Until one day, a divorce paper and a child that wasn't hers forced her to uncover the life her husband had been living behind her back. But what happens when the woman they thought would crumble starts documenting every lie? And how far can one calm, steady voice carry when backed by the truth? Before we dive in, ask yourself, what's more dangerous? Rage, or a woman who knows too much and refuses to raise her voice? If stories of justice, strength, and quiet revenge move you, like, share, and subscribe now. And get ready to witness how Julia rewrote her ending. Let's begin. My name is Julia Bennett. I'm 38 years old. And for the past 15 years, I've lived in a home that looked like a dream on the outside. White shutters, a soft blue front door, a porch swing that creaked gently in the Carolina breeze. People used to drive by and say, "That's the kind of place I want to raise a family in." And we did raise a family here. My husband, Ethan, is 41. He works in international freight logistics, which basically means he's always somewhere else. And our son, Landon, he's 16 now. Quiet, observant, kind in the way most people miss because they're too busy talking over him. For years, I kept this home warm. I made the holiday meals. I painted the nursery. I sat through ear infections and late-night fevers with Landon, one hand on his forehead, the other clutching the baby monitor. Ethan. He traveled a lot. At first, it was for 2 weeks, then a month. Then entire seasons passed where the only trace of him was a hotel receipt or a text that said, "Flight delayed, don't wait up." I didn't protest, because we agreed I would stay home to give Landon a stable life, because that's what a good wife does. Right, I gave up my interior design career to be the constant. I was the glue. Or at least I told myself that, until one day I realized glue cracks, too. 2 years ago, I signed up to teach a beginner's floral design class at the local adult learning center. Just 3 afternoons a week, 10 minutes from home. It didn't pay much, but it gave me a reason to change out of sweatpants, to hear my own voice again, and to feel useful, but not as a mom, not as a wife, just as Julia. That's when I started writing again, late at night after Landon went to bed. At first, it was just for me: journal entries, little scraps of thought. Then characters came to life. One woman in particular. She lived inside a lie, smiled through silence, and carried everyone else's weight until one day, she stopped. I published chapters anonymously online, used a pen name, J.M. Monroe. Strangers loved her, they cheered her on, and for the first time in years, so did I. No one, not even Ethan, knew, because by then, I had stopped sharing anything that mattered. A few weeks before everything unraveled, I found Landon standing in the hallway, staring at an old photo of the three of us. He was maybe 5 in it, missing a front tooth. Holding Ethan's hand like he was the center of the world, I asked, "What are you thinking about?" He shrugged, then said, almost too softly, "It's weird. Dad's in every picture, but never here." I couldn't speak, because what could I say that wouldn't sound like a betrayal? He walked away first, and I stood there in that quiet hallway, wondering how many years of pretending we'd all survived, just to keep a frame intact. The video call came the following Thursday. Ethan's name lit up my screen. It was the first time I'd seen his face in nearly 3 weeks. I answered with a smile I didn't feel. He didn't return it. Instead, he said, "Julia, I think we should get a divorce." Just like that. No lead-up, no emotion. He may as well have been asking me to buy more dog food. I didn't react, didn't scream, didn't even blink. I just said, "Okay." Then ended the call and sat in the dark, listening to the sound of the fridge humming like it had something to say. 3 days later, an express envelope arrived. Return address: a legal office in Chicago. Inside divorce papers, a printed breakdown of proposed asset division, and a yellow sticky note in Ethan's handwriting. Thank you for everything. We both deserve new beginnings. Please vacate the house before September. Vacate, as if I was just renting space in my own life. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the only thing I could do without collapsing. This house wasn't his. This was where I spent years patching our lives together, where I taught Landon to ride a bike, where I held Ethan's father's hand as he died while Ethan was flying over the Atlantic. Unreachable. And now, after all that, when he wanted me to vacate, I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, staring at a note from a man who hadn't looked me in the eyes in years, but had no problem signing away a marriage from 700 miles away. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because something deeper than tears was stirring, something steadier, calmer, older. A voice inside me whispered, "You've been preparing for this. Quietly, patiently. You're not powerless. Not anymore." I didn't know what I would do yet. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't signing anything without a fight. I didn't sign the papers. Not because I wanted to save the marriage, but because the way it ended felt like theft. There was no conversation, no apology, no explanation for the 15 years I gave him. And now he wanted me and Landon to just disappear quietly, politely, before fall. Ethan forgot something important. I may have lived silently for years, but I never stopped listening. And silence, and when you learn how to sit in it long enough, becomes the sharpest blade. That weekend, I cleaned the garage. I needed to move. Not houses, just my body, my mind. I found a box labeled George, Medical. It was filled with old files from Ethan's father appointments, receipts, handwritten notes from his final months. George Bennett had lived with us for nearly a year before he passed. Ethan couldn't fly back for the funeral. Said something about delays out of Belgium. I handled the hospice. I drove him to therapy. I sat with him while he forgot the name of his own son. That year broke me in ways Ethan never saw. Or maybe he didn't want to, but George, he noticed. He once called me the only adult left in this house. That same night, after Landon fell asleep, I sat at my desk and reread the asset breakdown. It was clinical, cold. One page for bank accounts, one for real estate, one for non-liquid support recommendations. My name was listed as Spouse 2. The house was listed under Thompson Lane Property, Bennett Trust, legally. It was under Ethan's name, his inheritance. But emotionally, I'd bled for every corner of this place. The grout I scrubbed, the storm windows I replaced when he was away in Dubai, the late-night sobs I swallowed in the guest bathroom so Landon wouldn't hear. Ethan had always hated confrontation. He called it drama. Said I was too sensitive when I asked why he never called on Landon's birthday. Told me to be grateful when he remembered to send flowers on our anniversary ordered by his assistant. Of course. He had a way of making neglect sound like logic, and I had a way of excusing it. I used to think, this is just what adult life is. Now I know better. This isn't adulthood. It's abandonment with better grammar. 3 days after the envelope arrived, I called him. Not to scream, not to beg, just to make something clear. He answered after 6 rings. His voice was flat, tired. "Julia, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not signing anything," I said. "Not until we talk." Pause. "Then you always overcomplicate things." I bit the inside of my cheek. "You're asking me to vacate the only home Landon has ever known. You can stay a little longer if it helps." He replied. "But the deed don't finish that sentence." He sighed. "I'm not fighting you for custody." "Julia, you'll get support. I'll transfer money each month until he's 18. He's 16. I said sharply. "That's barely 2 years. I'm following the law, and I'm following what's right." I ended the call. My hands were shaking again, but not with fear, with clarity. It was the first time in years I'd spoken with full honesty. No filters, no smoothing the edges, no tucking away my voice to protect his comfort. The next day, I took a walk around the neighborhood. There's a maple tree 3 houses down. It bends a little more each year, like it's bowing to time. I leaned against it, watching kids ride scooters down the sidewalk. And I asked myself, When did I become this invisible? Not just to Ethan, to myself. When did I trade in my boundaries for politeness? I remembered how, years ago, I started turning the music down at home whenever Ethan was back. He said the noise gave him a headache. So I lowered my voice, lowered the lights, lowered everything. That night, I pulled out my laptop, opened the document I'd been working on, my novel, the one under the name J. M. Monroe, Chapter 21. The chapter where the main character finally asks her husband why his business trips always ended in new perfume samples and hotel keycards. I stared at the blinking cursor, then kept typing, because this time, I wasn't just writing fiction. I was drafting the life I refused to lose. Landon knocked on my door around 11 p.m. He stood there in his pajamas, holding 2 mugs of peppermint tea. He handed me one and said quietly, "Are you okay?" I nodded, just thinking. He sat beside me on the bed. We didn't talk for a while. Then he said, "You don't have to say anything." "Mom." "But I noticed stuff." My chest tightened. He continued, "Dad doesn't really ask about me anymore, but he asks about you." I looked at him. Surprised? He shrugged. "I think he's scared of you. Not in a bad way. Just like you're not who he thought you were." I smiled, softly. He might be right. It happened late on a Tuesday night, the kind of night when the house hums softly and the world outside feels paused. Landon had gone to bed early after a long study session. I was folding laundry in silence, the only sound the rhythmic thud of warm fabric hitting the basket. Then my phone buzzed. Ethan, again. He hadn't called in days. But ever since I told him I wouldn't sign the divorce papers without renegotiation, he'd begun checking in like a man trying to keep a fire from spreading. I hesitated, then picked up. "Julia," he said quickly, "I really don't want this to turn into something ugly." His voice was tight, controlled, too polite. "Then you should have started this differently." I replied. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole day. "Look, I've been offered a promotion," he began, "but it's contingent on some paperwork being finalized, including tax records, housing, family status. I just need this cleaned up." I froze. There it was. The truth. Finally peeking through. This wasn't about closure. It wasn't even about me. It was about him. And a job. Just like it always was. "You want a clean break," I said calmly. "For corporate convenience, don't twist this. I'm clarifying it." He was silent for a beat. "Then you're being unreasonable." "No," I said, lowering my voice. "I'm being methodical. Like you." He shifted the subject. "I'll pay for Landon's school until he turns to 18. After that, he's technically an adult." "Technically," I echoed, "but college isn't guaranteed. Not legally." He added. I gripped the armrest of the chair, grounding myself. "You always did like hiding behind fine print. That's not fair. It's fairer than a 15-year marriage reduced to a spreadsheet." I ended the call without saying goodbye. My hands were ice cold, but my chest hot, burning with something that wasn't rage. It was focus. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to Ethan. I was preparing for him. The next morning, I emailed a lawyer I'd quietly followed on social media for months. She wrote articles about family law, asset protection, women's rights during divorce. Her name was Carmen DeWitt, sharp, no nonsense, respected. I didn't send a message asking for advice. I sent an appointment request because I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was building defense. But something kept bothering me. Why the rush? Why now? After all these years of distance? Did Ethan suddenly want to finalize things before September? And why, if he was always in Chicago, was the return address on the divorce papers from Peoria? It was a detail I almost missed. Almost. That night, while Landon was watching a movie in his room, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Ethan's old Gmail account. He hadn't changed the password, still the same combination of birth dates and city codes. The inbox was mostly clean, but I wasn't looking for the inbox. I clicked Sent Mail, then filtered by the last 6 months. What I saw made my heart beat slow and thick. The messages were mostly generic: shipping manifests, internal reports. But every email came from an IP address tied to a small town outside Peoria, 3 hours from Chicago, a town I'd never heard him mention, a town with no airports, no offices, no reason to be relevant, unless... I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, let the silence stretch until it cracked. Something was wrong, and I was done guessing. The next morning, I reached out to a private investigator. Her name was Marta Hill, retired legal assistant, known for tracing hidden assets and second lives. Her website was plain, no gimmicks, just a photo of her in a knit sweater with a tagline: "If something feels off, it probably is." I sent her the temporary address Ethan had used, his work history, his current schedule. She replied an hour later, "Give me 3 days." 3 days later, Marta emailed me a photo. I opened it on my phone while sitting in the grocery store parking lot, eggs and milk sweating in the trunk. In the photo, Ethan stood on a driveway in front of a modest home, not a rental apartment, not a hotel, a house. Beside him, a woman in her early 30s stood barefoot on the porch, blonde hair, holding a mug, and at his side was a child, a little boy, maybe 6, licking a popsicle, looking up at Ethan like he'd done it 1,000 times, and behind them a silver truck, the same truck Ethan told me he sold last year. I couldn't move. The image just sat on the screen, glowing like a wound. This wasn't just infidelity. This was betrayal built like a second life. He had another home, another family, while still mailing birthday cards to Landon and pretending to parent from a distance. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I whispered to myself, "Now I understand the urgency." I didn't sleep that night. The photo burned in my mind like a second sun. Ethan, the woman, the boy, the truck, all of it framed in perfect suburban normalcy. And it made me realize I had been grieving a version of Ethan that no longer existed, maybe one that never had. The next morning, I stared at the breakfast I had made and couldn't bring myself to eat. I watched Landon pour his cereal, feet bare on the hardwood, hair still messy from sleep. "Mom," he said, not looking up. "You're really quiet today." I opened my mouth, closed it, then said softly, "Have you ever kept a secret that hurt to carry?" He glanced up at me, thoughtful. "I think I've mostly kept other people's secrets, not my own." That answer stayed with me all day. I sent Marta a follow-up message asking for confirmation. Her reply was quick. The woman's name was Sierra Lane, age 32, dental assistant, single mother. The boy Jackson Lane was listed without a father on the birth certificate, but she included one more detail. Ethan had rented a second apartment nearby, small, sparse, just enough to make it look like he wasn't living with Sierra if anyone from work checked in. A fallback address, a decoy. I sat with that detail for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. I had felt it for years, in 1,000 tiny absences, in the way Ethan stopped asking about my classes, in how he paused before saying "I miss you," as if testing whether the words still made sense, in the way he texted "How's Landon?" but never "How are you?" This hadn't been sudden. This had been slow erosion masked by calendar invites and polite silence. That afternoon, I sat on the back porch with my laptop. The spring air was sharp, but not cruel. I opened my manuscript, scrolled past the last chapter, and began writing something new. A woman mid-30s, calm, methodical, finds out her husband has built another life, but instead of crumbling, she learns how to trace paperwork, read property titles, and understand estate law. She learns not to destroy him, but to protect herself. It was fiction, but barely. I opened a folder labeled George, Medical again. Flipping through the pages, I found what I'd almost forgotten. A preliminary will, dated 8 months before his death, typed and signed in blue ink, with a sticky note. To Julia file with estate attorney if needed. Inside, he'd listed an amendment, If Ethan were to divorce after George's passing, the primary house would transfer to Julia as a living gift, citing her caretaking residency and role as de facto head of household. I stared at it, notarized, verified, unfiled but legal. I didn't cry. I just breathed differently. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without trembling. That night, I printed copies. Then I called Carmen DeWitt. I told her everything. From the second apartment to the unsigned amendment, from the house deed to the child without a name. She didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. When I was done, she said, "You've already done the hard part. Now we make it official." Later, Landon found me in the kitchen, washing dishes I hadn't used. He leaned on the counter. "Are we leaving this house?" I looked at him. "No, we're not." He nodded slowly, as if weighing my tone. Then asked, "Is it about Dad?" I dried my hands, pulled out a chair, gestured for him to sit. Then up for the first time. I told him the truth, not all the details, but enough. That Ethan had built something else, that we were being quietly erased, that it wasn't our fault. Landon didn't ask for names or reasons, he just said, "So what happens now?" I paused, then answered, "Now." I stopped waiting for people to do the right thing. He reached across the table and took my hand. And that moment, more than anything, became my anchor. Because I wasn't just doing this to stand tall, I was doing this so my son would never think that silence meant weakness. 2 days later, Ethan called again. This time. He didn't ask how we were, didn't offer updates, just jumped into it. "Julia, please sign. I'm trying to make this easy for everyone." "Are you," I asked softly, pause. "You found something, didn't you?" "I found myself," I said. He exhaled, long and low. "You're not the same woman I married." "No," I replied. "I'm the woman you never bothered to know." Then I ended the call. Not out of anger, but out of clarity, because now I had everything I needed. The sky was heavy with clouds that Sunday afternoon, one of those still, humid days where even the birds fall quiet like the world knows something is about to shift. Ethan arrived around 3:15, no suitcase, no smile, just him buttoned up, pressed, and pretending to be composed. I didn't open the door with warmth. I opened it like a woman answering her past for the last time. He stepped into the living room like he still belonged there, looked around, glanced briefly at the wall of framed photos. His eyes landed on one in particular, our wedding day. 2007, I wore my grandmother's pearls. He wore a navy blue suit and the exact same expression he wore now. Blank. Controlled. "Let's not draw this out," he said. "Just tell me what you want." I nodded. Fine. I walked over to the coffee table and placed a thick envelope in the center, neatly bound, tidy, like him. He didn't touch it right away. "What's that?" he asked. "Terms." I replied, "Mine." He picked it up, scanned the first few pages, and his jaw tensed. "This isn't the agreement I sent." "No," I said calmly. "It's the one that acknowledges 15 years of sacrifice." His brow twitched. "You want full tuition for Landon? Legal responsibility until he finishes college. Moving support. Should we choose to relocate? 50% of your pension." I waited. "And a legal waiver that you'll no longer contest any living claim to this house." He looked up, eyes narrowed. "You're overreaching?" "No," I said softly. "I'm documenting what's fair." He let out a tight breath and tossed the folder back on the table. "You can't just change the deal mid-process. You made the original deal without me." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the photo shelf again. Picked up the frame from our wedding. "You know, I really didn't want it to come to this," he said. "I thought we could part with dignity." I stood still. "This is dignity," I said. "You just don't recognize it because it doesn't serve you." He turned. "You're going to take this to court if needed." I replied, "I have the amendment from your father's will, notarized, witnessed." He blinked. I stepped forward and pulled out the second document, laid it gently next to the first. It designates this house to me, cites my caregiving, references residency law. It was George's choice. Ethan's eyes scanned the pages, one hand clenched at his side. This is forged. No, I said. But feel free to argue that in court. His attorney has a copy. And he's still very much alive, and by the way. He sat down, suddenly looking older, like the weight of his carefully built second life was finally pressing down. I didn't sit. I stood over him, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about equilibrium. I didn't want a war. Ethan, I said quietly. I wanted closure, for Landon, for myself. He rubbed his face. You don't know what it's been like balancing two lives, trying to figure out what's right. No, I said, my voice steady. You weren't trying to figure out what's right. You were trying to get away with what's convenient. His lips parted, but nothing came out, so I kept going. You thought you could hand me a clean exit, that I'd walk out like an extra at the end of your story. But you forgot something. What's that I write stories now, and I'm not the extra, I'm the narrator. He stood slowly, eyeing the documents again. What if I don't sign, then we go to court? And every photo Marta took of you in Peoria goes into evidence? Every address? Every lie? His face paled. You wouldn't. I took a step closer. Try me. Silence. Then, softer than I expected. He said, Landon doesn't have to know everything. I agree, I replied. He deserves peace, but I need time. No, I said. You've had years. He swallowed hard. So this is it. I nodded. This is it. He walked to the door, paused with one hand on the knob, then turned back. You know what hurts the most, he said. That I didn't see this version of you earlier? I smiled, not out of triumph, but because I had nothing left to prove. That version was always here, I said. You just never looked close enough. He lingered, then left, without slamming the door, without taking the folder, without asking for anything else. And that silence, that was the loudest goodbye I'd ever heard. Landon came downstairs 10 minutes later. He's gone. He asked. I nodded. Then he said something that stayed in my chest like a slow pulse. He looked scared. I tilted my head. Of what? Of someone who didn't shout, just knew too much. The day after Ethan left, the house felt still in a different way. Not hollow, not abandoned, just cleared. Like someone had finally opened a window after too many seasons closed. I didn't clean up the papers on the coffee table right away. I let them sit there, like a line in the sand. Because this time, I wasn't rushing to tidy up someone else's mess. I was letting it breathe. That week, Carmen filed the full counterproposal. It included documentation of the amended will, property records, financial breakdowns, and photos, 3 of them, to be exact. Each one time-stamped, each one showing Ethan's quiet betrayal in full daylight. But more than that, she attached a declaration I wrote myself. A 6-page document detailing my role as full-time parent, caretaker to his late father, and primary financial manager of the household from 2010 to 2021. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was factual, measured. Written by a woman who had studied family law until 2A, ma'am, for months. In silence, Carmen called it undeniable. Judges don't respond to rage, she said. They respond to receipts, and I had receipts for everything. Meanwhile, Ethan stopped calling. No texts, no emails. It wasn't surprising. He wasn't the type to linger when control slipped from his hands. But that silence, it wasn't power anymore. It was fear dressed up as distance. 2 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived. Ethan's signature, acceptance of the counterproposal, full financial terms granted, custody agreement finalized. No handwritten note this time. Just one sentence typed neatly in the footer of the last page, all terms accepted without contest. I stared at that line for a long time, because for once, I wasn't the one folding. Landon came home from school the same afternoon. He dropped his bag by the stairs and said, "You look taller today." I laughed, because I'm standing on years of documentation. I said. He blinked. Is that a mom joke? Maybe. He grinned, then got serious again. Does this mean it's over? Yes, I said, legally as emotionally. I think I closed the door weeks ago. He paused. Is that weird to say no? I replied, it's honest. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened a new document on my laptop, not for court, not for survival, but for me. The story I had written under the name J.M. Monroe, the one about the quiet woman who unraveled the lie she'd been living, had gained unexpected traction. Hundreds of comments, dozens of fan interpretations. Some called it healing fiction. Some said it helped them leave their own long-dead relationships. But one comment stayed with me most. It simply said, whoever wrote this sees people the way no one else does. That night, I stared at the blinking cursor and whispered to myself, maybe it's time they know who wrote it. The next morning, I called Carmen again. Not about the divorce, but about intellectual property protection. Planning another book, she asked? No, I said, I think. I'm planning a life. A week later, I got a message through the contact form on my anonymous writing blog. Subject line. Are you the author of the Sparrow Letters, the Sender Lighthouse Literary? A publishing house I'd admired from afar for years. They wanted to acquire adaptation rights, not just for a print run, but for a limited series. I stared at the email for almost 10 full minutes, then forwarded it to Carmen. She replied with one sentence. You do realize this means you've built something no one can take from you. Right, I did, and I didn't. Because the shock wasn't that it happened. It was that it happened after I stopped asking for permission. That evening, I told Landon. He looked up from his homework. The Sparrow Letters. That's yours. I nodded. His eyes went wide, then narrowed. Wait, is that the one you said was about a woman who makes a quiet comeback? Yes. He smiled. That tracks. Then he asked, are you going to tell Dad I thought about it? Then shook my head. No. Because this story wasn't written for him to read. 3 weeks passed. No more court dates, no more documents to sign, no more late-night strategy sessions with Carmen. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house was just a house again. But it felt bigger now, not because the walls changed, but because I did. Landon settled into his rhythm again, school part-time shifts at the bookstore, long weekend walks with me and the dog. We didn't talk about Ethan much, not because it hurt, but because we no longer had to. Sometimes, silence is the best evidence that you've moved on. One afternoon, I got a text from Marta, short, direct, with a photo. It was Ethan standing outside a modest logistics center in South Dakota. His suit was wrinkled. He was holding a coffee cup like it weighed too much. No smile, no presence, just there. Marta's caption, Tier 3 analyst. No travel privileges. Corporate downgrade confirmed. I didn't feel triumphant, just free. Because I had already stopped chasing fairness, now I was simply living without weight. Later that week, I received a package from Lighthouse Literary. Inside was a formal contract and a note handwritten by the editor-in-chief, J.M. Monroe is the voice of women who survive by remembering who they are. I held the pen for a long time before signing, and when I did, it felt nothing like revenge. It felt like validation. The series went public under my pen name. An animated adaptation, simple but elegant. The main character's eyes looked eerily like mine, sharp, soft, tired, and never blinking. The reception was instant, quiet but powerful. Emails flooded in, readers saying things like, I didn't even know I needed this until I heard it. I thought I was weak until I realized how much I was holding together. Thank you for not yelling, for just telling the truth. One day, Landon came home from school with a strange look on his face. What's up? I asked. He sat down at the kitchen island and said, Dad called me. I froze mid-stir at the stove. Oh, he just talked. I waited. He said he saw your series online, asked if it was based on everything. I turned slowly. What did you say? Landon smiled faintly. I said, if you think it's about you, maybe you should ask why. I covered my mouth and laughed. the kind that starts small but ends in release. A few days later, an unmarked envelope arrived at the house. Inside a cashier's check, $85,000, with one line on the memo: alimony, no contact. I placed it on the table. Didn't move for a while, then folded the check and slipped it into a manila folder marked Legacy. Because that's what this was. Not a gift, not guilt, just the cost of being erased and then remembered anyway. I used the funds to do something I had been thinking about for months. I founded a small scholarship fund, named it after George Bennett, yes, his father. Because despite everything, that man once looked me in the eye and said, "You're the only one who actually stays." The scholarship was for young women in North Carolina pursuing studies in literature, education, or law, the same three things that helped me rebuild. One evening, while organizing my files, I found the old wedding photo, the one Ethan had stared at during the confrontation. It was yellowing at the edges, a little warped from sun and time. I turned it over, on the back, in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize at first. If I could do it again, I'd ask you who you were, and actually wait for your answer. There was no name, no apology. But it was Ethan's handwriting. I didn't shred it. I didn't frame it either. I just folded it once, placed it in the same drawer as the check, and closed it gently. Not to forget, but to never repeat. That night, Landon came home late after study group. He walked in, saw me at the dining table, and asked, "You okay?" I nodded, more than okay. He dropped his bag and hugged me longer than usual. Then he said something I still hear in the quiet moments. "You know, Dad told me once, you're dangerous." I raised an eyebrow. Landon chuckled. "Not because you yell, but because you stay calm and still leave people with no way out." I let that sit in the air. Then whispered, "Maybe that's what freedom sounds like." A year passed. Quietly, without drama, without breakdowns or explosions, just mornings filled with coffee and clarity. Evenings spent writing, sometimes late into the night, sometimes not at all. And peace. A new kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from others behaving, but the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself without apology. I moved into a new apartment in the historic arts district of Asheville. It wasn't big, but the light poured in just right every morning, and the windows opened without sticking. It had a small terrace. From the third floor, I could see people walking below: college students, musicians, parents with strollers, tourists sipping lavender lattes. Sometimes I'd sit there with a blanket around my shoulders and a mug in my hand, thinking this isn't what I planned, but maybe it's what I needed. Landon started his first year at the University of North Carolina. Digital media, scholarship, dorm life. He came home on weekends, sometimes with a basket of laundry, sometimes just to sit on the couch beside me and say nothing at all. And each time he walked in the door, he'd give me the same long hug, not rushed, not out of obligation, just steady. Like his way of saying, "You're still home." The Sparrow Letters, my debut series, continued gaining momentum. International rights were sold to Japan, France, and Brazil. I declined all in-person interviews. No signings, no readings, no press photos. I told the publishers, let the story speak. The writer's face isn't required. So I remained J.M. Monroe to the world, and just Julia to myself. A young woman wrote to me once, "Through the publisher's email, your story gave me permission to leave a house that looked good in pictures but felt like a museum inside." I sat with that sentence for an hour because I knew exactly what she meant. I didn't keep tabs on Ethan anymore, didn't check LinkedIn, didn't ask Marta for updates, but sometimes, through whispers or shared acquaintances, fragments reached me. Sierra had left him. Too many broken promises, apparently. Jackson had trouble adjusting to school in South Dakota. The small-town life wasn't what Sierra expected. Ethan kept his job, but lost his promotion path, demoted quietly, forgotten even faster. But the thing is, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance, because who he became no longer concerned me. One rainy evening, I was sorting old boxes when I came across something unexpected. A birthday card Landon had made in third grade. folded construction paper, hand-drawn stars, glitter that still clung to the corners. Inside Mom, you're like a superhero with no cape, but you still save everything. I pressed the card to my chest, not to grieve, but to remember what mattered. The next morning, I started writing something new. Not about betrayal, not about marriage, but about a woman who builds a life after everyone else stops watching. No drama, no spectacle, just the daily decisions that change everything. Choosing calm over chaos, choosing presence over noise, choosing yourself even if it means starting alone. I didn't name her right away. I let her walk, let her breathe, let her rediscover who she was without the weight of someone else's expectation. Maybe this time, I won't use a pen name, maybe I will, because I want the world to know the story, not the woman behind it. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Unmarked envelope, no return address. Inside a faded photo of the three of us. Me, Ethan, and Landon on some distant Thanksgiving. Our arms linked, our eyes half closed against the sun. The kind of moment you don't realize is final until much later. On the back, written in shaky, almost hesitant print, if I could do it again. I wish I'd asked more, and listened all the way through, no signature, but I knew who wrote it, and I knew what he meant. I didn't frame it, didn't throw it out either. I tucked it into the bottom drawer of my writing desk, not to hold on, but to remember who I never want to be again. Today, I live in clarity, in warmth and truth. I no longer wait at windows, no longer shrink myself to fit someone else's silence. I write, I mother, I breathe, and I walk freely, no longer needing a cape to prove I survived. Because I didn't just survive, I rewrote the ending. Not every war ends with raised voices. Some are won with steady hands, quiet truths, and documents signed in ink and clarity. Julia Bennett didn't seek revenge. She didn't tear anyone down. She simply refused to be erased. She showed us that real power isn't loud, it's grounded, prepared, and unshakable. And for every woman who's been told to stay small, to keep the peace, to accept less than she deserves. This story is a reminder you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to win. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows exactly where the paper trail leads. And as for Ethan, he built a life on silence and secrets. But in the end, it was her silence that exposed him. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on love, dignity, or justice, drop a comment, and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that reveal the strength behind stillness and the truth behind what others try to hide. We'll see you in the next one.